back to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast, a place where I interview tech leaders, CEOs, entrepreneurs, futurists, technologists, thought leaders, and even the occasional celebrity about how they are leveraging technology to transform their business. And today I want to talk about a first world problem of sorts. Let's say, for example, that you need to contact a business about a product or a service. And rather than endure that painful experience of emailing them and getting a reply from a do not reply email address, or calling them and painfully navigating through those horrendous list of options such as push 1 for this, push 5 for that, etc., only to then be sat on hold for ages. Maybe you noticed that that same company accepts messages on WhatsApp, Messenger, or Instagram. Now, I want you to take that scenario a step forward. And on a repeat conversation, can you try to imagine emailing, calling, WhatsApp, Instagram, or whichever method is easiest for you at that time, and the agent instantly knows your backstory. You don't have to repeat yourself. So, for example, you could start a conversation on WhatsApp and continue on Messenger, for example. Is that even possible? And after reading about Facebook parent company Meta and how they're exploring this area, and also reading a few blog posts on conversational commerce, how it's going to be the next big thing in online shopping, and also how Facebook is focusing on business-to-consumer messaging and business messaging, I reached out to them to see if they'd be interested in exploring this topic with me. And thankfully they said yes. So buckle up and hold on tight, because I'm going to beam your ears all the way to Hawaii, where Dan Levy from Meta is going to be talking about how more than 1 billion people use messaging platforms such as WhatsApp and Messenger to connect with businesses. And we'll also explore how consumer behaviour will shift, and it's requiring businesses of all sizes to adapt, and fast. So a massive warm welcome to the show, Dan. Can you tell the listeners a little about who you are and what you do?
Sure. Neil, thanks for having me. I'm Dan Levy. I lead business messaging for Meta. In plain speak, that means working for all of the business clients on WhatsApp, Instagram Direct, and Messenger. I've actually been at Meta since long before it was called Meta. I've been there a little over 13 years. I've worked primarily on payments, but the bulk of my career has actually been working with small businesses, both on the product and the sales and go-to-market side. In about the last 6 months, I chose to focus exclusively on business messaging because I'm just so excited about the opportunity. It's been something I've been kind of thinking and dreaming about for 10 years, but I'm sure we'll get into that story later in the podcast. On the personal side, I'm a father of 4. Been born and raised in and around the Northern California area, and excited to keep working on tech and trying to help everybody out.
Fantastic. 13 years is a long time, but I'd love to take you back even further than that. I always like to focus on my guests and their journey as well as their destination. So I'm curious, can you remember where your passion for tech came from, or the moment that put you on this path that would lead to Facebook and Meta, etc.?
Yeah, there were a few. I remember in the early or the mid 1980s, my dad was kind of into computers a little bit early. We had one of those IBM machines that probably cost more than they do now. And he had gotten a modem and dialed into this French service called Minitel. I don't know if people remember this. It was almost before the internet. It was a modem dial-in to get to what was the equivalent of like a white or yellow pages in France. And we didn't speak any French. And I can't say I had a full epiphany that I could see the entire future of the internet from that moment, but it was pretty remarkable for somebody that basically could only learn about the world from a World Book encyclopedia in our room to be able to kind of connect with something that was 5,000 miles away from where I was growing up. That was probably the first moment. And then the second piece was in the mid 90s. I was in Northern California in Sacramento, distinctly not Silicon Valley. And I remember reading about the companies and some of the things that were getting built. And I just kept telling myself, I got to get myself there. So I got over there for college. And like most kids bouncing around Silicon Valley at the time, I was trying to finish my studies early so I could start a company, which I ended up doing. I took that one bankrupt. So it just shows that not every company is always like up and to the right, like you read about in all the papers. But it was a great start. I've kind of had the bug probably since my teenage years.
And I'm curious, do you still miss the sound of a modem connecting to the internet? Because there was something kind of special about that sound, wasn't there?
Oh, it was amazing. That's a joke that my kids definitely do not get if I were to make that noise like a beatboxer. But yeah, no, that was magical. I remember it. And, everyone's blessed to have the internet speed connection on their phones from the middle of nowhere now that it took us so long to get back in the day.
100%. And of course, it was that path that would eventually lead you to Meta. And just to set the scene for today's conversation, can you tell the listeners a little bit more about how actually 1 billion people are currently using messaging apps and also how they're using them? Because you must have quite a few insights around this.
We do. I mean, I don't think I have to tell all the listeners here today about messaging. My guess is any one of the people listening today has probably sent or received dozens of messages, even if you've just woken up. It's probably the first thing most people do when they grab their phone after waking up. We are living in a messaging first world right now. And all over the world, that's happening. At Meta, we run 3 of the leading messaging platforms in the world with WhatsApp, Instagram Direct, and Messenger. And what we've been just super impressed by and super excited by is the number of businesses that have embraced it as well. We have over 1 billion people actually messaging with a business every week between our 3 platforms, which is pretty remarkable. But I've always told the story that, businesses will always go where the consumers are. 40, 50 years ago, it was location, location, location. And today I tell this story where if the phone is ringing, and you're a business, you're going to answer it. Well, today the phone may not be ringing, but it is buzzing on your device. And whether it's SMS or WhatsApp or iMessage, the businesses are responding. So what we're seeing is a huge trend of businesses following consumers, which is something that we've kind of based most of our business strategy around. And today businesses are using it for all parts of their connection and communication with with people, whether it's lead generation and trying to tell their customers about something the same way they may have used SMS or email marketing or direct mail, or if it's follow-up on service, maybe a customer wants to write in over WhatsApp instead of calling a phone number. We think that's a great use case. And what we think is really magical about business messaging is that it creates a single thread between you and a business. So to use, example, maybe you're in the buying a car, you discover the car, you write back and forth. We've actually seen some great use cases of this in Brazil that we can get into later. And then even after you buy the car, you've got a single WhatsApp thread with the dealer. So if you have a warranty issue, if you need a service, if your lease is coming due, you've got one thread that you can go back to, whether it lies dormant for 6 months or you keep it open and active all the time. Now, a car is a big purchase, but you can imagine the same thing with maybe somebody that you're buying, groceries from, who can keep track of what you do. The magic is the persistence, the privacy, and the fact that for the business, they can develop a really personal relationship back in like how they had it in the old days, but with the scale of technology. So you could tell my excitement from this. There's a lot of different things we can do. But like I said, I don't think I have to tell many of our listeners here today. They're probably experiencing it already.
And we will have people listening in, I think, about 165 countries at the moment. And one of the things that fascinates me is how everybody treats messaging differently per country or region. For example, in China, they famously use WeChat for just about everything. And where you are in the US and where I am in the UK, we almost increasingly expect a Netflix-style experience where we seamlessly jump from device to device. We could be on a train with Messenger and then somewhere maybe reading in bed on WhatsApp. And we almost flick between the different platforms seamlessly, just whichever we've got open at that moment in time. So the reason I bring this up is, do you think conversational commerce will be the next big thing in online shopping, where we can start a conversation with a company on Messenger and then continue it on WhatsApp without any friction in between? Do you think that will happen?
Well, I think you mentioned WeChat. I think WeChat is a remarkable service. I mean, for many people, WeChat is the internet in China. And I think in some ways they've built what we describe as this kind of living in a messaging first world. I do think this is the direction that a lot of businesses and people are going to go for the reasons we talked about. It's highly personal, it's private, it's persistent, it can be very, very valuable. You talked about this kind of seamless connection between things. We're really excited about that opportunity. And we do see that, there's a lot of work that's going on in the industry right now to try to make it very continuous for people. We actually got very excited about this and purchased a company a few years ago. It just finished integrating, called Customer with a K, who were really excited about it. And they had built an entire service working with direct to consumer and other businesses around centering all the communication around the person and not around the technology. And that sounds really obvious, but if you think about it, many companies have their email system or their 1-800 or their phone system for taking phone calls, or then they have a separate system for WhatsApp. Customer built the entire system around the person. So as the person switches between, maybe they start on a phone call, but then they want to WhatsApp you later, or maybe they start on your website and they want to chat, it's all integrated into one service. So this concept of kind of seamless communication built around the person, I think, is a really key insight, and one we're excited to help bring and accelerate in the market.
And there's a quote that I often use on this podcast from IBM, and I think it's over 5 years old now. They predicted that the last best experience that anyone has anywhere quickly becomes the minimum expectation for the experience that they want everywhere, and they take that with them regardless of the industry or products, etc. So I'm curious, is that what you're seeing around the world? Is it consumers that are driving this shift and businesses that are struggling to keep up with that evolving demand and expectation?
Well, I'm a huge fan of creating better experiences for people and businesses. I've been working on that for 20 years, since before I got to Meta, my startup and some of the other places that I've been. That what you describe is actually a really core belief that we have of Meta about how we build products. And I can tell some stories about this.
Yeah, please.
I've been working on the business side of the company almost my entire time. And I think about every transition and major set of business products we've launched. We've had a general principle to always follow the consumer first. So when we moved from just kind of the very early Facebook, if people remember this, to the newsfeed, which was big and controversial, it always started where the newsfeed had to be first for people. And then we enabled businesses to be in the newsfeed. When we started before we were going to do ads on video, which, by the way, every client in the world wanted to do video ads, we had to make sure the video experience for consumers of seeing and posting each other's videos was great. And then we would build it for the businesses. The same thing then applied to stories, then the same thing for messaging. So as we were building messaging had to be a fantastic consumer product, that top experience that you described from IBM, before we could build in the expectation for the business. So, no matter what we go and build next into the future, we know it's always going to be led by the consumers, kind of what a consumer's top need is. And that's one of the reasons we've been investing in messaging, because we've seen the consumer shift to messaging, to this messaging first world. And we're now building and supporting the businesses as they go and meet the consumers where they are. I will add, we have seen some pretty innovative businesses who have embraced the shift to messaging and have kind of led us as well, building kind of new experiences into messaging that maybe some of the consumers haven't seen. Probably the most obvious place where that is some of the more innovative work that they've done in how they respond to messages. If you think about it for a business, one of the things that's great about messaging, if you and I were chatting on WhatsApp or you're chatting with your family, is that it's another person on the end of the line. Well, that's great unless your business gets really big and successful. And then the question becomes, well, how do I respond to all these messages coming in? I can't just keep hiring another person. And we've seen businesses do some really innovative stuff where they've created chat bots that I think are far beyond kind of what you used to see in phone systems 10 or 20 years ago with press 2 for this, press 3 for that. And so I think we'll see some pretty interesting work, especially as artificial intelligence gets better and better, to help businesses respond to clients, but still keep the tone and the brand of their business in their responses.
So for that business leader or key decision maker listening, and they can see what's coming here, how can they and their business expect to meet these increasing demands of having that fluid conversation across WhatsApp, Messenger, Instagram, etc.? Is that something that you're actively exploring at Meta right now?
It's a huge focus. Yeah, we think every business should be investing in messaging. I told this story for the first time. I kind of mentioned it briefly on this podcast, but I'll tell the expanded version of it. I was talking with a bunch of small business owners. This is probably like 7 or 8 years ago. They were complaining. They're like, "Look, we're getting these messages on Facebook, but I don't have time to respond to these. I got a business to run." And I stopped them and I said, hey, look, if your phone rang, would you answer it? They're like, oh, yeah. I said, why would you answer it? Well, because it might be a new client. I said, your phone is ringing, but the next generation isn't calling you. They're sending you messages. So, embrace it. Ask the younger people in your company how it works. Try it out yourself. We used to have an old maxim that when we were working on ads at Facebook, we had to get the CEO of the company to use the product, because once they use the product as a consumer, they would instantly get it as a business. And I think the same is true for messaging. But to directly answer your question, and for the decision makers that are out there, listening in, there's been a ton of innovation in this space. We provide a number of direct solutions. We just held a huge conference a few months ago, and we can provide the links on all your social media and all your media as well for people to check in and dial in and watch some of those sessions. They're fantastic. With some of the new products that we made available, including our biggest WhatsApp announcement, our cloud API for any business. For businesses that don't want to do the direct integration, there's a number of partners and countries all over the world that can help support and integrate and get you started. But the place I'll leave you with is the phone's ringing and it's time to answer it.
And of course, it is such a complex issue at the same time, because on one side of the coin, there is businesses that want to meet the expectations of their customers, and the customers want to be able to have those fluid conversations. And also, there's on the other side of the coin, there are going to be some WhatsApp users that don't want to share information on Messenger or Instagram and vice versa, and things can quickly get muddy. Where do you begin to tackle a subject like that too?
Well, I think one of the most important things, and it's been top of mind for the last 5 years, is around consumer privacy and information sharing. And WhatsApp is, I think, one of the absolute leaders in this, an end-to-end encrypted service. It's built with that in mind, with consumer trust at the forefront of what we're doing. And that has definitely influenced all of the decisions that we've made in business messaging. I actually think one of the key value propositions of it is the concept of being end-to-end encrypted and being private. You're not posting for everyone else to see. You're writing and having a direct conversation with a business. It's like that personal face-to-face conversation that you had, 20, 30, 40 years ago before the internet. And I think consumers understand that, and businesses get it as well. And it's built into the products and into the service that we provide. And it's also up to the business to create, that's an advantage for them to explain how they use data and explain it to their customers, because it's clearly something that clients want to know. But top of mind for us and deeply integrated into the products and services that we build.
And a topic I think we've also got to explore, because we'll have people listening all over the world. And I know for some people, possibly of the older generation, the rebranding of Facebook to Meta might have confused them on what your big focus will be across all your platforms, and if it is just the metaverse now. So is business consumer messaging and business messaging still something that is a very big focus? I mean, from listening to you today, I suspect that it is, but what would you say to those people listening that are a little bit confused?
Yeah, well, I guess on a personal level, I mean, I'm betting my career on it. I went from working just on the overall ad systems across all the properties to just work on business messaging because I believe so deeply in it. And that's something that's supported by all of our executive team that's excited about it. I think probably just to back up and tell kind of the simpler story, Facebook, the app is just one of a number of different things that we have now built. WhatsApp, Instagram, Messenger, Facebook are all services used by over 1 billion plus people all around the world. And the company's become much more than just the Facebook app that we started in. We've told the story and talked a lot today, Neil, about how we've always kind of followed consumers, helped lead a little bit, but followed consumers. And consumers have moved to a number of different services. And our name reflects that we're providing a number of those. The metaverse is super exciting. All of us that watched Mark's introductory kind of movie video, I think got very excited about it. My kids came and watched it with me as well and had a blast. I think the metaverse is coming. Business messaging is still a key and huge part of our business today. And I think it will be in the future. I mean, just to give you one proof point, this is interesting. I mentioned how I worked with our businesses and a lot of small businesses for a long time. There's over 10 million active businesses paying money for advertising across our platforms every month. More than 40% of them are actually paying for ads that we call kind of click to message ads. So are using and encouraging people to open threads with them, message threads, instead of going to their app or website. So it's a huge part of our client base. $1 billion+ part of our business. It's one of our fastest growing businesses. Definitely part of what we're going to do. And as the metaverse evolves, I know that messaging is going to be a big part of it because that's a core way that people communicate.
And of course, I think we often forget that just 2 years ago, for the majority of people and employees as well, video conferencing was something that a lot of people avoided. Everyone felt awkward on camera. A lot of people completely avoided it. But now even grandparents have been using things like Zoom and Teams to keep in touch with their family members. That's all become the norm. So I'm going to ask you to look into your virtual crystal ball now and ask, how do you see messaging evolving into the metaverse as well? I know it's not going to be overnight. It's going to be a few years possibly. But how do you see that space evolving?
Yeah, of course. First, I do have to tell a story. You mentioned that you're in London. I lived in London for a little while when Skype video came out for the first time. And I joked that I was seeing my parents back in California more when I lived in London because of Skype video than I was when I was living 100 miles away in Silicon Valley. So, and that wasn't that long ago. That was only about 15 years ago. So technology, as you said, does accelerate really quickly. And I guess as I peer into my crystal ball, the vision that I share with our company and with our teams and with clients and partners that I talk to is really this concept of a thread-first world, where what if the interaction that you had is as seamless and as easy as the one that you have when you're messaging your friends and family? So you start a thread and maybe it's just text, but then you need a little bit more help and it moves into an audio call or a video call. And it becomes persistent over time so that you can track all the things that you're doing with them. And that thread actually becomes the center of that relationship. It's available when you need it, but it's hidden away, private, and not for anyone else to see the rest of the time. I think what you see with WeChat in China is what we're going to see. More applications, kind of mini applications, widgets, whatever word you want to use to kind of stay out of the buzzwords, which I know you like to do on this podcast, where you can do increasingly more functional and interesting things through that message thread. And that persistence and that privacy is, I think, a real differentiator that we're going to see. So, maybe to use an example, we talked about kind of the car example, but we recently had some product tests go in India with folks just ordering really simple things like groceries, where you can get kind of repeated lists, but then you could communicate with the groceries as they're being delivered. And I think those kind of use cases we're going to see more and more. One of the ways you kind of look into the future is you look at places where, like when the mobile phone came out, there were places where they never had desktop computers, and totally new experiences got built on the mobile phone because they were never encumbered by the desktop computer. I think in some of these places where people start on the mobile phone and messaging is their first entree into the internet, you're going to see the internet almost built into messaging and into these messaging first threads. And we're going to get really creative and innovative things where companies are messaging only and they never even have a website. And that's pretty exciting to see.
Dan, you mentioned at the beginning of the podcast a story or use case from Brazil. So I was wondering, would you mind sharing that with us just to bring to life everything we've talked about today and also give it a little bit more context?
Partners partnered up with General Motors in Brazil, and they started campaigns to reach people on WhatsApp. And I forget the exact number, but it had to have been in the thousands of cars that they ended up selling, where their head of marketing wrote in and basically said, if it wasn't for WhatsApp and this integration, I would have had to open something on the order of 25 new dealerships during this time period to make up for the volume. I think the best place is actually to listen to it from him. It was so good. We had him present at this Conversations conference we hosted a few months ago. And it was just mind blowing because you almost, like if you read it, you almost don't believe it. You got to hear him talk about it. But he said it just, the pandemic was obviously very hard for so many people, but it enabled them to try things that they wouldn't have tried before. And that's the type of innovation that I think we can see when it's driven either by a consumer need or a business that frankly is a little desperate and needs to figure it out. But I don't think we're going back. I think they're going to continue to do that. I think they're going to inspire a number of other businesses to try new things and realize that you can have that personal conversation over a message thread because it's not just text. Maybe it starts in text, but then if you become really interested, a real person will actually pop up and you'll have a video conference with them directly in your chat thread. and off you go.
Well, for everyone listening, I'll get a link of that conversation from your team, and we'll add that to the show notes so people can check that out.
Fantastic.
You mentioned a few moments ago that you've dedicated your career to this. So I'm curious, what is it that excites you personally about the future of messaging, and also, of course, the role that Meta will play in that future?
Well, I think one of the things that I've loved, in the 20 plus years that I've been working in technology is the role that it can play to bring kind of power and opportunity to people that didn't have it before. I mentioned really briefly, I had started a company, and back when I started my company in 1999, it was actually really hard to process payments. We had to go through a huge application with the bank. They didn't want to let us get payments. It was very hard to get up and running. My company ended up closing. 2 years later, I went to work for PayPal in 2001. And that company was all about giving anyone, starting with eBay sellers, the ability to process a payment. And that opened up and enabled a lot of people to be an entrepreneur who couldn't have been an entrepreneur before. You see more and more of that with companies, Amazon with the web services, Shopify, Stripe, making it so easy for anyone to become a business. I think what we're doing with messaging could be another 10x of that, because so many people use the messaging apps. So if we can build those services and enable anyone to become an entrepreneur, whether it's selling their goods or their services, all built into an app that they already understand how to use as a consumer, I think is just really, really exciting. And there's nothing you can do that's better for people. Well, that's maybe an extreme point, but one of the things I'm focused on is giving people that kind of economic empowerment to create their jobs, help create their lives, take control of what they want to do, whether they aren't able to work somewhere else because of time zones or hours. It's a real playing field leveler. And I'm just super excited about what we're going to be able to do if we can reach our vision to build all those services into these widely available messaging apps today.
Well, a huge thank you for joining me on the podcast today. But as we started the podcast talking about your origin story and the journey you've been on, as we come full circle, I always like to ask my guests to finish on a personal note too. And of course, none of us are able to achieve success without some help along the way. So is there a particular person that you're grateful towards who helped you get where you are that we can give a little shout out and a thank you to?
Yeah, well, you're 100% right. There's been so many people that helped me, whether it was my parents helping me get to college, all the teachers and educators. But this is a tech-focused podcast, so I'll tell a tech story. Mm-hmm. My final year in school, I was doing a senior project, and I was lucky enough to meet some of the folks at PayPal when they were only about 30 employees. They tried to recruit me to come there. I wanted to go start my own company, but 2 years later, when my company closed, David Sachs, who was the COO there and has gone on to kind of a very prolific tech career, called me. He's like, you got to come back. And he helped get me back, introduced me to what being a product manager was. And I remember after about no more than maybe 100 days there, he put me in charge of a much larger team where I was the least experienced and the youngest person. And he just said, it went something to the effect of, this is a meritocracy. Whoever's going to help the clients and whoever's going to help the customers the most, and that's you, go. And I was kind of blown away and not ready, but he believed in me. He saw something and gave me opportunities to accelerate and do a bunch of things that I didn't even think I was capable of doing. And I think about that all the time now as I'm in a position to try to help both clients and a lot of the younger folks that we work with of, who's good, who can we give an opportunity to? And I'm always very thankful to David for that.
It's such an important thank you to give there. And I think we all impact other people in our daily lives, and we don't get to hear about it and don't even realize it on many occasions. So thank you for sharing that very powerful story. And of course, Facebook, Meta, Instagram, WhatsApp, all huge companies, huge websites as well. So we've covered a lot around business messaging today. So if any business leaders listening would like to keep up to speed with the kind of work that you're doing, is there anywhere you'd particularly point them to?
Probably the best place is we have a dedicated site with all the content focused just on business messaging. It's got messages from Mark, our CEO, Mark Zuckerberg, sharing his vision, tons and tons of tracks all the way down into how to get implemented. It is just at metaconversations.me. Tons of content there, recorded sessions, links, abilities to, of course, message with us and talk with us. If you want to learn more about any of the things I talked about, whether it's customer, WhatsApp, Instagram Direct, or any of our partners as well, metaconversations.me.
Well, I always say quite cheesy at the end of every episode that technology works best when it brings people together. And I think for many people listening before our conversation today, when they hear Facebook, Meta, WhatsApp, Instagram, they just think of these huge tech companies and don't think about the people behind them and their personal stories. So thank you for putting a bit of a beating heart to the company and sharing your very personal story, and also how you've dedicated your life to business messaging and trying to solve real problems for businesses and consumers and improve experiences, etc. But more than anything, just thank you for taking the time to sit down with me and share your story today.
It was great, Neil. Really appreciate it. Thanks for helping us put a face on it as well.
Wow, Dan covered a lot of valuable information there that provides, I think, a timely insight into where Facebook and its parent company Meta see the future of messaging for businesses. But of course, you've heard from myself today and you've heard from Dan at Meta. But the way this podcast works is I then turn the microphone over to you and I want to hear your insights, your opinions, your experiences, and even predictions about how conversational commerce could be the next big thing in online shopping, how Facebook is focusing on business-to-consumer messaging and doubling down on business messaging too, and what does that mean for you and your business? What are you doing to prepare for that inevitable moment when that experience becomes the standard expectation for everyone? And I want to hear all sides of the story, so I open everything up to you. You can email me, techblogwriter@outlook.com, Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn, TikTok, whatever social platform you're on, just look for Neil C. Hughes. I'm nice and easy to find. But don't just hit follow, send me a quick message, send me a DM, and let me know what you thought of today's conversation and any extra insights that you'd like to add to that. So tomorrow I'll return with another guest and an entirely different topic and industry of how technology is transforming our work, our life and world, and I hope you'll join me again. So a big thank you for listening, and until next time, don't be a stranger.